But here's a bit of music news for you today in case you missed it. So we'll recap a little bit of what we did yesterday. I want to focus this little portion on vinyl. What were the top selling vinyl albums of 2017? This is so interesting to me because, as you would guess, and coming off of Breakfast with the Beatles top this list, which overall is really impressive. Again, vinyl sales overall were up. Let me see here. U.S. album sales figures in 2017 have been unveiled. Vinyl continues its resurgence. 14.32 million LPs sold on vinyl. That's a 9% jump from 2016 and a record high since Neilson has been keeping track of this, which started in 1991. 91 vinyl sales were nowhere near where they are today, so that continues to climb up. Probably nowhere near where they were in 77, but, you know, still, all things considered. The Beatles still dominating the vinyl sales is really unbelievable to me. I mean, it's great. I say unbelievable in, like, it's awesome. Like, I love that the Beatles are still dominating. You know, it just goes to show you how rich this music was. Which Beatles album, I should say, do you think made it to the top? That's the question. Out of all the great music that the Beatles have released, which one do you think made it to number one? You may be surprised by this list just a little bit. Let me see here. So here's the list. This is the top 2017 selling vinyl albums. Number 10 was Michael Jackson's Thriller, selling 49,000 copies. Not bad. Number 9, the La La Land soundtrack, also at 49,000 copies. I'm surprised when some of these soundtracks make it into these lists. By the way, not the last soundtrack to be here. Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, 54,000 copies sold. Not all that bad. And what's interesting about all these numbers, too, by the way, these are new sales. There's no way to track sales of old records. And think about your local record store, you know. How many times do you roll in there for something new and you wind up buying 2 or 3 old albums? You know, so you might have bought Dark Side of the Moon, but if you bought an old copy, it doesn't count towards this list right here. Bob Marley and the Wailers, Legend, the best of, at 56,000 copies at number 7. Prince and the Revolution's Purple Rain soundtrack, 58,000. I don't really count that as a soundtrack per se. To me, that's an album. That's a little bit, to me, different than, say, La La Land. Anyway, number 5, Amy Winehouse's Back to Black with 58,000. That album is really, really good, and I bet you it sounds amazing on vinyl. I don't have that one on vinyl, but I bet it's ridiculous. Just goes to show you how insane the Ed Sheeran fans are that are out there. He sold 62,000 copies of his latest record, Divide. So, for those of you thinking that only creepy middle-aged men continue to collect vinyl, like myself, and by the way, don't call me creepy. This clearly shows that 12-year-old girls are buying vinyl records as well. You know, it either shows that or it shows that maybe Ed Sheeran has more creepy middle-aged men fans than we think. So 62,000 copies of Ed Sheeran's Divide on vinyl. I mean, that's pretty cool. To me, that's awesome because honestly, 12-year-old girls, bought that record. And so for the fact that they're out there buying vinyl, I think is really sweet. Guardians of the Galaxy, the Awesome Mix Volume 1 soundtrack sold 62,000 copies. Again, I seriously underestimated the popularity of Guardians of the Galaxy. Not only are the movies killer, but the soundtracks are huge. It topped the list of best-selling records, period, CD, streaming, all that stuff, and clearly did really well on vinyl with 62,000. I think Bill was at whatchamacallit, Record Stop with us and bought that really cool cutout of the guy, and maybe that was part of it. They released one of the characters in vinyl, like it was all cut out, and just the middle was the song, and the other parts of him were just all cut out. It was kind of cool looking, so maybe that would have been part of the contribution. Selling 66,000 copies at number 2 was the Beatles' Abbey Road, and being bested just 6,000 more copies was the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's coming in at number 1. 72,000 copies sold. That is impressive. By the way, it is sad, but it is true that most of the rock acts that top the charts, I'm talking about the Billboard charts, that wind up at number 1, sell anywhere from like 100 to 125 to 150. Like, that's all you have to sell literally to hit number 1 in the first week. And a lot of the acts this past year or two have only been selling, it used to be 400,000, it used to be huge numbers. Now just like 100,000 can get you into the top spot on the charts. And the Beatles literally fell 28,000 copies short of that on vinyl for an album that they released 50 years ago. I mean, it's crazy, right? It's crazy. We talk about the Beatles a lot, but when you sit back and you look at the cultural phenomena that they have, that literally 50 years later, with zero fanfare, they can reissue an album and still manage to sell 72,000 copies. Like, there are new artists that would kill to get those sales records in their first week, and they just can't. And they just can't. And the Beatles continue to do so. It is truly unbelievable. It's an impressive top 10 list. Michael Jackson, La La Land soundtrack, Pink Floyd, Bob Marley and the Wailers, Prince, Amy, Ed Sheeran, Guardians of the Galaxy, and 2 Beatles. I would proudly love to own all of those albums. Well, maybe not the La La Land soundtrack. That's a lie. I'd like that one too.